Hello and welcome to Profiles and Issues, the cable television talk show that gives you in-depth interviews with prominent people in the news. I'm your host, Dennis Rudin. Our topic for this broadcast, the 2019-2020 Democratic primary race for the United States Congress in the 17th Congressional District. This district currently includes all of Rockland County, central and northern Westchester, White Plains, and some areas in North White Plains under the local political jurisdiction of the town of Greenburgh. Our current Congresswoman Nita Lowey, a Democrat, has held the seat for 31 years and is considered to be a popular political icon for progressive causes and revered by many. Ms. Lowey's announcement that she will not run for re-election in 2020 has opened up a new chapter in Westchester and Rockland politics as candidates compete to capture the Democratic nomination. Our profile and guest for this evening is New York State Assemblyman and now Democratic candidate for U.S. Congress in the 17th CD, David Buchwald. David, welcome back to Profiles and Issues.
Thank you very much, Dennis. Pleasure to be here.
It's always a pleasure to see you, and you're always doing things. So let's get into this. My first question is not unique, but I think the viewers want to know. What made you decide to leave a safe assembly seat where you've served and been very popular for your performance and run for Congress?
I have a very firm belief that we need a strong voice in Washington to represent Rockland and Westchester. It's what we've had in Congresswoman Nita Lowey. I want to thank her for her service. I actually interned for the Congresswoman back in 1997. One of the reasons I was inspired to get involved in public service was the leadership that she's demonstrated. But it is clear to me that in these times, we need Congress to exert its authority and to have a fighter for this district to push for the issues that bring this district together. Things like common sense gun safety, support of education, support of the environment, defending a woman's right to choose, and a whole host of other issues, some of which are universal for all time, and some of which are specific to the fact that, frankly, over the last 3 years, we've had a president who has torn this country apart and certainly torn the fabric of our democracy apart.
Well, that's what I wanted to get into. I just want to ask you, though, another thing about the geography of the campaign. Currently, you represent the 93rd Assembly District, which includes the city of White Plains, Mount Kisco, Harrison, and I believe the towns of Bedford, Lewisboro, Newcastle, North Castle, North Salem, and Pound Ridge, if I haven't left anything else out. Now, are all of these areas inclusive in the congressional district, or are you going to have to go out?
About 2/3 of the Assembly District is in the congressional district. There are a few towns in northeastern Westchester that are in the 18th Congressional District, and so I'll be, on some level, sorry to not be running to continue to represent them, though I've heard very positive feedback from those parts of Westchester to my candidacy. And there are large parts of Westchester and certainly in Rockland County that I don't currently represent, but I'm going to make sure that I am a candidate, and if I have the honor, a representative of the entire part of the district that needs a voice. And I am a big believer that it's my job as a candidate to get to every corner of the district. So whether that's the other parts of White Plains, which I don't formally represent in the Assembly, but that I used to represent in local government, and that now the 30,000 residents of White Plains would be part of this congressional district. The other parts of Westchester, especially into northwestern Westchester, that I've worked on
Rockland
issues.
County,
and then across the bridge, all of Rockland County, absolutely needs someone who is committed to representing their voice in Washington.
All right, as you've stated, and I'll clarify, the country is divided and polarized on the national scene. We are hearing every day in the press about corruption at the highest levels in federal government. And of course, with the cable news stations, some of them give you facts and others give you slanted views, which I guess makes it more difficult, okay? Many voters today tell me they feel Congress, the institution, is dysfunctional because a tribalism mentality exists between Democrats and Republicans. Are you willing to reach out and work with the Republicans and compromise, if need be, to pass major legislation?
Dennis, when I was sent to Albany 7 years ago as a state assemblyman, Albany was known as the dysfunctional capital of the United States. Washington has obviously taken on that mantle. We've improved a number of things in Albany, but also our federal government has really been made all the more of a partisan institution. That having been said, when I went to Albany, I worked across the aisle on issues that I thought were just good initiatives for the people of New York. I haven't compromised in any way my very firm beliefs in the principles that I hold dear, that I believe our Democratic Party holds dear. But when I was pushing for something like open government or ethics in government, things that New York State government is not known for, I was willing to have supporters on both sides of the aisle. And my view, which I would continue to have in Washington, is a good idea, wherever it comes from, is a good idea. And especially if it comes from my constituents, then it's my job to try to represent them as ably as possible. That having been said, there is a stark contrast between the Democratic Party's view of the role of government and the Republican Party's view, especially under Donald Trump.
All right, let me follow up with exactly what you said. Let's take a topic like gun control, or, you know, this is a Democratic topic. They're against assault weapons, the majority of the party, and which tends to be progressive liberal. And then you have people, as we know it, to the far right, like Bernie and Elizabeth Warren.
You mean far?
Bernie Sanders.
You mean right?
I meant far left. I apologize, far left. Okay, so the question is, let's say, you know, the Democrats are trying to move on that legislation. Same thing with Roe versus Wade. But you have a situation because of the sitting president currently, Donald Trump, who doesn't, you know, who will not sit down and negotiate. So how do you work with it, with both sides, on those two issues?
A couple of things to note. First, on common sense gun safety measures, it is not a minority of the country that believes we need to make guns safer and reduce the number of violent gun deaths in our country. It is the vast majority of the country. Most people believe that expanding background checks, banning assault weapons, making sure that we have procedures in place so that if you are a danger to yourself or others, and that's perceived by a family member or a school official, that there should be some procedure through the courts for making sure you don't possess a firearm. These are not things that are partisan issues. There's things where one party is willing to effectuate the will of the American people, and too often the other party is only willing to defend the NRA.
So how do you buttonhole a legislator from the other side and say, look, I mean, how do you find common ground?
Sure. Well,
years ago when I was growing up, Ronald Reagan used to invite Tip O'Neill into the office, and you know they would work on steps. You know, first they drink coffee or drink, and they get loose, and then they had, I don't know, they played cards. But even though you could say, all right, that's, you know, PR, the bottom line is they were able to compromise and make deals. You know, and now we have a stagnant government. And just to be fair to any Republicans that are watching, Jimmy Carter had the same problem. He couldn't work with Republicans. And, you know, coming from the South, some of the Democrats were uncomfortable too. And I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just, you decided you want to run for Congress.
Absolutely.
It's tough out there now. It's a mess.
Okay, I'll be
It's
meeting,
a swamp.
I'll be meeting voters from all different parts of the ideological spectrum. But what I think they all tend to respect is someone who sticks by their principles but is willing to have that dialogue. I am someone who's always, as an elected official, whether on the Common Council here in White Plains or State Assemblyman, I've always had an open door policy, have fought for nonpartisan beliefs of transparency in government, accountability, ethics, and effective government and efficient government, while at the same time having a 100% pro-choice record, a 100% pro-environment record, a 100% record on reducing gun violence in this state. And we've had tremendous successes on those fronts, including with working across the aisle, but by not saying that we're not willing to hear what's going on, but there are things that we believe in as Democrats.
But I mean, you made the statement about democratic principles. And, I respect you for your principles. I respect Republicans for theirs. But if you're going to get legislation done, I guess the core of my question is, how do you reach a common ground just so they're going to sit down?
I just say, look at my record. For 6 of the 7 years I've been in the State Assembly, we had a de facto Republican state Senate.
So how'd you deal with it?
All I know is I did do that dialogue with state senators to get bills passed. Part of it is putting forward good ideas.
Could you give us an example of 1 or 2 bills?
Sure. So when I started my first year as a state assemblyman, I proposed a state constitutional amendment to remove state taxpayer-funded pensions from corrupt public officials.
Yes.
When I did that, folks said, that's a good idea, young Mr. Buchwald. There's no way it's going to get passed in Albany. And maybe they were right under the old ways of Albany. But I was persistent. I hit the ground running. First term assembly member, had 40 members, both Democrats and Republicans of the state assembly, signing on in the first year. Held my first ever Albany press conference on this very topic, ethics in government, something not known for Albany progress. And then second year, we got to 90 members. 90 members of the state assembly, both Democrats and Republicans, more than a majority of the 150-member state assembly. Leadership was not particularly enamored with this idea. Maybe not surprisingly, a short time later, the Speaker of the State Assembly and the Majority Leader of the State Senate were arrested. And then what was previously impossible now became possible. As of 2017, it was passed overwhelmingly by the people of the state of New York. That's an example of putting forward a good idea because it's right, it's what the people of New York want, and not giving up just because it's difficult to do.
I'm going to have to move you along because time just runs. Okay, next. This morning, before taping the show, I heard on the radio that the Democrats in the House of Representatives won the vote to go for formal impeachment hearings. I think the motivation was because they just couldn't get any documents from the White House. And needless to say, that environment is difficult. And what we hear from either the left media or rather what we hear from the right media is that it's not being conducted fairly, etc. What is your views on this? Should Congress conduct an impeachment? I think they call it inquiry at this time. I'm not sure because they voted to vote on it. Should they conduct an impeachment inquiry at this time with regard to the Ukraine scandal? Is it all right for it to be closed to the public?
Well, without a doubt, there should be impeachment investigations and hearings. Those hearings, I believe, will transition shortly to being open to explain to the American people how much of the basic norms of this country, let alone laws, have been violated.
So if you were in Congress now, would you vote to have the impeachment?
Yes, I'd vote to impeach the president.
Okay.
I think there's enough already in the public record to demonstrate that that's an appropriate step. I, though, think it's also important to have a process, just like in Watergate, whereby The American people are shown what this president's about and how he's put his own personal interest above that of the American people.
All right, let's move on. Do you think President Trump was correct in withdrawing 100,000 troops from northern Syria, thus giving Turkey the green light to attack the Kurds, who are our allies against ISIS?
Certainly not the way he precipitously did it. I think it has led to ISIS prisoners being released. It's led to a more destabilized region. It has put the Kurds, who have been our allies in recent times, in a untenable position, and I think it sends a message to the world that we will not stand by.
Is this going to weaken us as a world power?
I think it has. The concept of how are we going to be able to build partnerships across the world when there's a sense that without laying any groundwork, a president can simply turn a 180 is a troublesome precedent.
Now, you know, this current president, President Trump, has turned the tables on many institutions in government, the way it's operating. In other words, he has publicly criticized them, publicly, and he doesn't always reach out to them privately, etc. Does this call for a new role for Congress to take? Is this part of the myth of dysfunctionalism that the people feel towards Congress? I mean, do we really have checks and balances in the government now?
Well, I think what happened in recent years is we've seen that a lot of assumptions about the presidency or the responsible nature of an executive have been gone by the wayside, and essentially we didn't write things down into law that previously were assumed, and one of the tasks.
I mean, let's flash forward to January 1st.
Of 2021.
Of 2021.
Yeah.
And let's assume that you're taking that oath, okay? What would be one of your first priorities with regard to the role of Congress?
It won't be January.
Either domestically or, of the.
It'll be January 3rd, I think, is when the Congress gets sworn.
Oh, okay,
so,
okay.
But roughly then.
Okay, so what would be your? How do you think Congress should? Do you think Congress should function different, either domestically or foreign policy?
I think for a long time, but especially over the last few years, there's been a ceding of power. We've seen in the last few years the effects of a ceding of power from the legislature, the branch of government that is elected by the people, to the executive, which is largely an unelected branch of government. There needs to be more oversight and authority within the legislative branch, and we.
But right now, constitutionally, Congress has the power over the power of the purse, right?
In theory, but we have now a president who says, "I don't care what Congress has appropriated money for. I'd like to move money to things that Congress has not appropriated money for." So it has to be made explicitly clear. Not a dime can be spent.
So you have to rewrite the legislation.
I think there needs to be firmer statements in law so that presidents cannot run roughshod over what was the basic understanding of Americans, which is exactly what you said, Dennis, which is Congress has the power of the purse, not the presidency.
You know, since the end of World War II, and I know you're a student of history, even though you haven't been around 1945, you know, we've gone with first the Marshall Plan, and then we, you know, where we gave aid and we helped people get on their feet, and we gave them tariffs and everything. And now we're in a situation where is NATO still relevant? What do we need to formulate a new trade policy? Because ever since NAFTA was introduced, and even though the Democratic Congress did not vote on it, Clinton went along with the Republicans on this and got it passed. And so now we don't have manufacturing here, but yet they want to come and dump their goods here, hit us with tariffs. Any insight on those
Oh, look,
things?
there's a lot packed into that question. First, in general, on international relations, is without a doubt that having strong, durable alliances is to the benefit of the United States and to our partners. And whether it's on the security front, just the general diplomatic front, military front, or on economics, it's easier to solve problems when you work together as opposed to either working in opposite directions or what seems to be the approach of President Trump recently, which is just our way or the highway, which only leads to, I think, forcing the rest of the world to band together out of necessity against our interests. I firmly believe that we need to have a United States that continues to stand up for the core principles that we've always stood up for, which is a sense of fairness, support of democracy, supporting innovation, and the idea that we want a world where people are free to prosper.
So,
and that's not been the focus recently.
You still support NATO, in other words.
Oh, without a doubt. NATO is one of the most crucial alliances in the history of the world.
Okay, and how about the fact of the tariffs? What are your feelings about trade policy?
I think in general, trade can benefit the folks on both sides, but it is very clear that to have set up a system whereby the president can unilaterally upend interactions.
But I mean, is this thing where
problematic.
you punish countries by adding tariffs? I mean, also like with China and Japan, but more so with China, they've always been hacking into our computer systems. They're always.
There are significant.
We get a lot of merchandise. Many American cars now, their factories are being built in Mexico, so that lays off blue collar workers.
There are very
that hurts
significant
unions.
issues with countries, particularly China, being involved in organized industrial espionage and not playing by a sense of fairness of the norms of what should be moving our country.
I mean, whoever
forward.
gets in to be the next president, Democrat or Republican, would you push on these issues, or would you just see what the party?
I think it is extremely important that both the hard work of American workers and the developers of new ideas, that we be encouraging them to be developed here, and then once they're developed here, not stolen by overseas countries and the companies that are government run.
Okay. Now, next question. We can't go into it in depth, just a few short statements on it because our time is running. Hopefully you'll come back and we will.
Great.
Okay, what is the future of healthcare in the United States? Should we stay with our current plans and improve the Affordable Health Care Plan to its fullest, or move to a single-payer healthcare system?
Well, I think it's a multi-layered question. First, I wish that other states had done what New York did in terms of implementing the Affordable Care Act. We did a far better job here, both technologically and in terms of outreach, and that's led to significant reductions in the uninsured here in New York, far more than other states.
Can people use their own doctors under the Affordable Health Care Act, or do they have to go to government doctors?
There's significant. The Affordable Care Act is based predominantly on private insurance, and like in so the regular employer-based model for insurance, some insurance companies do have limited networks, but the concept is it's not a government-led decision. That having been said, I have voted for the New York Health Act, which is an attempt to reorganize healthcare in New York State. I think the case for that is even stronger at the federal level, because then you don't have state versus state dilemmas. So I do think that as much progress as we made here in New York, we do need to look at the fact that we haven't been able to solve every issue here, and it would be helpful to have a full federal approach on that.
And infrastructure. A lot of foreign countries at one time that were third world countries also have better transportation systems. They have those special kinds of trains. In Westchester, It's changed a little bit with the Latimer administration, but you ride around here, one of the most expensive areas to live in the country. And I'm not sure whether the roads are state roads, county roads, or local roads, but a lot of potholes and things. And I see some difference now, but this is. Do you think this is a national problem?
It certainly is a national problem. I've been pleased during my time in office to work on infrastructure because I really believe that these investments are what propels our economy going forward. So whether that's state roads, Metro North, the sewer water infrastructure in our area, or just a sense of investing in the future, including education, which is human capital. These things really matter. And of course, it's not all government projects. Part of what I've been very involved in is the utility companies' reliability of their infrastructure, because when we have a storm that comes through and knocks out power for large portions of the county for a week, believe me, there's a lot of economic activity, let alone personal safety, that's at risk. And that's why I've been working on that issue significantly with George Latimer and many others across the area as part of a group called United Westchester.
Thank you. Okay, new technology. Now, I admit, on my iPhone, it sleeps with me. I leave it in the bathroom when I go in the shower in case, to listen to music or to get the weather reports. I mean, it's phenomenal. I'm not saying, so I'm not against new technology. I don't think many Americans are. But what a lot of Americans are uptight about is the artificial intelligence aspects and the fact that, like in factories, many new machines are being created for the express purpose of doing away with human labor and thought. The motivation is capitalism. I'm not socialist, but although I do think some socialist programs were needed, like what President Roosevelt did with Social Security, etc. But I mean, is it, how are people going to have jobs and survive in 5-10 years? I understand that even truck drivers, the trucks are going to be automatic. And this is something, it's part of the public has the responsibility to bring it up, but this is something that has never been addressed by the politicians. And if you just let the corporations do it, they and their board of directors, they're only interested in money.
It's a very important question. I'm sorry that the technology in the studio tells me that we might have to continue this question next time.
Well, we still have 2 minutes. You're on emergency.
I am continually a believer in one of the great features of our American economy being that we innovate. And it's important to have the companies that bring us into the next decades based here in the United States. That having been said, we also have to make sure that we are nimble as a country in making sure that we transition well from one era of an economy to another. And it is not acceptable to simply say, you as a breadwinner for your family, you have to just deal with the fact that technology is changing.
Does Congress have the power to promote legislation so that big companies are fleeing the country, and opening up?
Well, some of that is because of tax policy.
Right. And so can you readjust that?
I'm a tax attorney by trade. I haven't practiced since I entered the assembly, but there is no doubt that just a giveaway incentive to move overseas. The Obama administration tried to actually put in place rules to not promote companies going overseas. For whatever reason, the Trump Treasury Department has undone those rules. I don't understand that, but I do know that we do have to make sure that we're promoting economic growth within our country.
All right, just give me a yes or no and just 1 or 2 sentences. Recent times all over the country, but here in Westchester, hate crimes in houses of worship, community centers, in synagogues, mosques, the BDS movement, which really is anti-Semitism against American Jews who are Zionists, exist, instituting a travel ban for Muslim majorities. How do you feel on this subject? Are you against hate crimes. Would you promote any legislation to ban those?
Opposed to hate in all its forms. I'm a co-sponsor of legislation to denounce the BDS initiative, and I firmly believe that it is a role of government to try to bring people together, not tear them apart.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
We only hit about 60% of the issues. Got to have you
There'll
back.
have to be another time, but this is great. Thank you so much.
All of our programs can be seen free on demand on your computer or iPhone at any time on our website at www.thedennisrudenshow.com, www.profilesandissues.com. Please send your comments about the program, interact with us, and learn about issues on our Facebook pages, facebook.com/The Dennis Rudin Show. Email us at www.profile.issue@yahoo.com. All of our programs are broadcast on Optimum Cablevision and Verizon Fios. Check your local cable listing for time, day, and channel. This is Dennis Rudin saying so long for Profiles and Issues.